Hey guys, so I'm getting ready to make some of my strawberry jalapeno jam. I went to the farmer's market yesterday and picked up a whole bunch of strawberries, and so I'm getting ready to make this jam. I didn't make any of it last year, and I thought Mr. Smith was just going to die of heartbreak, and so I picked some up, some strawberries and some jalapenos, so that I can make him his wonderful strawberry jalapeno jam this year. Now this particular canner that I'm getting ready to use is a steam canner. So you might be wondering what a steam canner is. Well, a steam canner is basically a canning appliance or tool that you can use instead of the great big pot for the hot water bath canner. So it only uses about an inch or two of water, about 2.5 quarts, which means it comes up to a boil much faster, which means it uses less energy. You don't have as much mass, so it's not heating up your kitchen as much, and so it's just a great option. Now, a steam canner is not a replacement for pressure canning. So if you have low acid foods like meats or sauces or soups or anything like that, green beans, you cannot use a canner like this for foods like that. This is only good for high acid foods. So the test that I am doing is checking where the boil point is. There's actually a gauge in the handle of the lid, and you can see when it reaches the boiling temperature for your zone. And this is something you should do every year, the first time that you're going to use it. And it's also something that you should do if you move. Like if you move to a different area, you should do this to see what the boiling point is for your elevation. It's very important in canning to know what your elevation is. If you don't know what your elevation is, there are a bunch of websites online where you can put in your zip code, you can find your location and it'll tell you what your elevation is. You can also check with your local extension office and they can help you with that sort of information. So like I said, I'm getting ready to do the canning, but had to test out my canner first to see where my boiling point was. There is a gauge on the top in the handle, and it actually has 3 different levels for different elevations. And so what you're basically doing is I put 4 quarts of water in here in jars to kind of replicate the mass of food being in there that I would be canning, and I'm bringing it up to a boil. I'm seeing where the high point is for that gauge, and then I marked it with a permanent marker so that when I go to actually can, I'll know once it's reached its top level so that I know it's ready to start the timer for the processing. Alright, so I've got my strawberry jalapeno jam cooking here. I started with 4 cups of crushed strawberries that had, of course, the stems and everything removed. Then I added a cup of diced up jalapenos that had the seeds and the cores removed. Added in a box of pectin, a 1/4 of a cup of bottled lemon juice. It's important to use bottled because fresh lemon juice does not have the acidity level. It can vary a lot, and so you want to use bottled lemon juice. Bring that up to where it's beginning to boil, and then you add in 7 cups of sugar. And now all of that is coming together, and we're going to bring this to a hard boil. A hard boil is when the jelly or jam is boiling so much that it begins to rise up and foam, and stirring it briskly will not make it go down. That's why you're always going to use a really big pot, way bigger than you think you're going to need, because you need to allow the jelly and jam to come to that point. And you want it to boil like crazy. Of course, you don't want it to be splattering everywhere, so turn it down a little bit if you have to. Alright, I've got it to where that is happening now, so I am going to stir and stir and stir. Set my timer for 1 minute. And you want it to do this heavy, hard boil for a full minute. If you don't do a hard boil for a minute with your jelly or jam, that can cause it to not set up. And there are ways to fix it if you have a set failure where the jelly fails to set up. And I have an article on my blog, cosmopolitancornbread.com, where I take you through the steps to save your jelly. And so just because your jelly doesn't set up doesn't mean it was wasted. You might be able to save it. And worst case scenario, you've got some really awesome fruit syrup that you could put on pancakes and waffles and everything else. Alright, so we came to a full minute. I'm going to actually move this to the front burner to make life easier for me. Keep stirring because it is still boiling like crazy. Now I'm going to keep this on heat. The stove is still on. I just don't have it at that extreme boil. You want it to stay nice and hot because we're getting ready to fill our jars. And everything about the canning process should be hot except for the rings. Your lids should be warmed up, not boiled. Boiling will damage the seals. And so you warm them up in some warm water. You've got hot jars. Depending upon what you're doing, they may need to be sterilized. Some people will sterilize their jars every time they can, just as a precaution. That's fine. Alright. This is settling down a little bit here, so I'm going to get ready to start prepping this. Now, because it was boiling like crazy, I have a lot of foam on the top here. We don't want that. So we keep the stove on to keep the jelly nice and warm, or the jam nice and warm, but we don't want it to be continuing to boil because we want this foam to go away. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a spoon or a ladle and I'm going to scoop all of this off. Alright, so now I'm going to start jarring up my jam, and I've got my jars over here in the canner getting nice and hot. They've been sitting here. My strawberry jalapeno jam is all jarred up, and I have it here in the steam canner. Now the steam canner has a little flat rack that goes in the bottom, and depending upon the brand of steam canner you have will determine how much water that you need in there. This particular brand that I have uses about 2.5 quarts of water. You bring the water level right up level with the rack that is holding the jars, and the lid goes on, and we turn up the heat. Now this particular jam will process for 10 minutes, and that's normally as a hot water bath canner. I'm using a steam canner, and it's going to process for the same amount of time, but I'm not going to start counting that time until my gauge up here has reached the proper temperature, and that is what I did that test for. Now the gauge does tell you what the range is, so when you get into the green you can start the timer, and that little notch will show me that for sure it has reached the top temperature and is at a full-on boil. So just like with a hot water bath canner, you can't start the timer until that water in that canner is at a full boil. Because this has a lid on it, you can't really see the water and how it's doing. You've got that little gauge, so then you know when it's reached that point. So there's a couple other great reasons why you may want to use a steam canner, and that is if you like making jellies but lifting that great big super heavy pot of water and carrying it from your sink to the stove is difficult, and vice versa. This is a much more manageable size of pot with a lot less water, a lot less weight, and additionally that excess weight isn't putting a lot of stress on your stove top. I can tell you that I have in the past bent the top of my stove because of the weight of a canner on there, and so this being that it only uses a small amount of water in comparison to a traditional water bath canner, is a lot less heavier and probably safer if you are using, like, say, a glass top stove. So a lot of people have never heard of steam canners, and so I just wanted to share some basic information about them with you. They're really easy to use. It takes, you know, much less time to bring the water up to a boil, and just, I love it. It's way easier. So one of the things about steam canners is that the atmosphere inside there reaches about 212 degrees or so. And some of the older ones, you had to judge by how much steam was coming out, or have a thermometer by the port, because there's actually a little vent back here. And the one that I have actually has a gauge on top to let you know exactly when it's reached that temperature, and so there's no guessing involved. It's very clear. When you're in the green, you're good to go. So if you are thinking about getting a steam canner or want to start looking into that, I highly recommend you getting one that has the gauge like that. I will put a link down below to this particular one that I have. It was relatively inexpensive. I think it cost me about $45, somewhere around that. Alright, so this is settled. So I'm going to go ahead and very carefully open the lid. And I'm going to tilt it, the top of it, towards me so that the steam goes that way. Go. And then, just like any canning process, I'm going to remove the jars. That's it. And now we wait for the tink, tink, tink of success. Alright you guys, so that is some of the basics of canning with a steam canner. If you'd like to get more information about steam canning, I have an article that goes more in depth about it on my blog, cosmopolitancornbread.com. I will link that down below. I also have, of course, the recipe for the strawberry jalapeno jam on my blog as well, and you can also find that linked down below. And if you like making jellies and jams, definitely give that recipe a try. It is one of my top most popular recipes of all time. So that is it for today. Thanks for hanging out with me here in the homestead kitchen. My name is Constance from Cosmopolitan Cornbread. I'll talk to y'all next time.